Thank you everyone for joining us today. People are still logging in, so if you're just joining us now, take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. I'm Shauna McKinnon, and I'm hosting today's webinar, Understanding Regional Adaptation Needs to Support BC Agriculture. I have a joint role with both the BC Agricultural Climate Adaptation Research Network and with the Climate Action Initiative. So it's a pleasure for me to get to host this session today with my colleagues from CI, both Emily MacNair, who's the director, and Harmony Bjornson, the regional program manager. In today's session, this is a pre-session for a workshop that's hosted each year by the BC Agricultural Climate Adaptation Research Network, also known as ACORN. And ACORN is a provincial network that launched in 2017 to improve linkages and collaboration to more effectively address climate change adaptation research needs and extension across BC. And the annual provincial workshop is a chance to share knowledge on research and tools that are available to support agricultural climate change adaptation. Since the Climate Action Initiative has been leading work on agricultural adaptation since 2008, their work is a great place to start in order to understand what issues are most concerned for BC farmers and how solutions can be developed through consultation and collaboration. Before we get going with the presenters, I just want to go over a couple of quick Zoom housekeeping notes. There will be a Q&A after each presenter today, and what I'd like you to do when you have questions is to use the Q&A box to type in your questions. You can find that in the Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen. By typing in your questions there, it's just easier for us to keep track of them, and you can type them in as you think of them as the presenters are speaking. And you can also upvote other people's questions. So if there's a question that you would also like to hear answered, then please give it a thumbs up, and then that will bring it up to the top of the list, and we'll answer those questions first. If you'd like to chat with each other, with the other participants, or say hello, then feel free to use the chat box for those comments. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily MacNair, and you can start us off. I'll just stop sharing my screen here, and so Emily, you can share your screen. Perfect, looks good.
Hello. I was just looking for the unmute button there. Everything's under control. So yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm gonna kick us off here, and I will start by just giving you a sense of what we're going to cover off together, Harmony and myself. I'll give a bit of an overview of the Climate Action Initiative, and yeah, many of you may have heard this before, so I'll try and keep that short and sweet. And then the real focus of our presentation today is our regional program, so I will get into a bit more detail about how that program works, our planning process, and the content of our regional plans, and how we go about prioritizing our projects through that program. And then I'll be passing it over to Harmony, and she will take a deeper dive into our work in the Okanagan. We think that by providing a bit of a case study with the Okanagan, that will help to give people a little bit more understanding of how the work flows once we've finished our planning process, and we are now well down the road with project work in the Okanagan. So Harmony will provide some examples of our work on the ground in that region. So just in terms of what the Climate Action Initiative does, we have two kind of main areas of focus, I guess, in terms of our mandate. The first is obviously that we're trying to support the sector with adapting to climate change. We do that in a number of ways. We create all kinds of products and projects, everything from sort of baseline local risk assessments for risks to agriculture through to trying to create decision support tools or actual physical monitoring on the ground. So a very broad range of types of activities are supported through our programs, but the ultimate goal is always about building the capacity and the tools and the resources for the sector to adapt. And then the second area of focus is that we really, and it will come up, I'm sure, multiple times during our presentation today, that we really want to foster a collaborative approach and a strategic approach to the work, bringing together a range of government partners, industry partners, other kinds of local organizations with an interest in agricultural adaptation, recognizing that that collaborative effort is really necessary to address these climate change challenges. And just a tiny bit more detail about background work, context about CAI. We're quite a small team. We're located across the province, so we have team members on the island, in the interior, in the Lower Mainland. We're under the umbrella of ARDCorp, the Agricultural Research and Development Corporation. We also have the Investment Agriculture Foundation administering our project funding, and we are delivering the Ministry of Agriculture's Climate Change Adaptation Program. So we have a real range of partners at the provincial level. Our funding is provided by the governments of Canada and British Columbia. And again, we have a lot of different partners at that local level. I'll get more into that, as will Harmony, as we go along. So we have two main programs that we deliver. And really both of these programs they're focused on similar issues, adapting and climate change, but they're coming at these issues from different approaches, different scales to the challenges that the industry is dealing with. So the regional scale program is really looking at those. The reason that we are working at that scale is anyone who's familiar with agriculture in the province knows that we have a very diverse industry where we have very different kinds of production in different parts of the province. And certainly also producers are dealing with different types of growing conditions. So the general shifts in climate may be similar across the province, but the ways that the industry needs to be responding may be quite regionally specific or production system specific. So our regional program is really trying to respond to that variation across the province. And we also recognize that regional scale, as I already mentioned, that we need to be responding strategically and collaboratively to these challenges, and that the regional program really allows us to evolve a collaborative and shared understanding of the issues and how to move forward with addressing them. So the farm level program is really coming from that, exactly what it sounds like, from that farm level. So where we have farm level issues and where we're really looking at the practices and technologies that farmers might need to support them with adapting at that scale. So this is an applied research program. It's getting into evaluating and demonstrating those practices and technologies to look at what is going to work most effectively at the farm level. And again, it is a partnership-based program, but the partnerships are much more in that applied research context. So researchers and producers kind of working together at the applied research scale. So that just gives you the broader sense of the two programs. And now we will be pretty much focusing on the regional program today, but you can always contact Shauna for more information on the farm level program, or check out our website. So this slide is just to demonstrate visually, and there is a lot on this slide, but it just demonstrates the partnerships that I was already speaking about. So on the left side, this highlights our provincial level programmatic kind of partnerships where we're working operationally to set direction and deliver the funding. And on the right side, these are the partnerships that really are the functional partnerships to deliver the project. So everything from local governments through to NGOs, and of course, farming organizations and producers themselves. And I think, that inner circle is really about the committees that we have. We have collective ways that we make decisions and move our work forward. So that just highlights those committees, which are very important, and lots of people take their valuable time to give us input in those committees. So just an overview of the sort of scale and scope of the work we have done since 2013, just to give people that sort of overarching picture. We have now completed 8 regional plans across the province. And as is highlighted here, quite a few projects were delivered in the first 5 years of funding that we've had for that program. We're now sort of at the midway point of our second 5 years of program delivery at almost 30 projects, either completed or underway. We did also go through an updating process. Some of the regional plans were completed now several years back, even 2013, 2014. So when we were shifting into our new phase of program delivery, which happened in 2018, we did do a bit of a revisit and a sort of progress to date process in each of the regions that we were working in between 2013 and 2018. So those documents are also available. And then with the Farm Adaptation Innovator Program, there were 15 projects across the province, a real range of types of farm level challenges and commodities. And we now have, in this round, in total, we expect to have a dozen projects across the province. So moving now into a little more detail about our regional program. I just wanted to put this map up because it gives the visual for really where we are working across the province. It shows both the areas that with the blue dates, where we completed plans kind of a little earlier in our delivery, and then the more recent plans are highlighted with those orange dates. And that really just gives you a sense of how deep we would be into our project work in each of these regions. And the thing that I want to highlight about our regional program is that there are kind of two major phases of activity. We have our planning phase, which I'll get into a little more detail about now. And then once we've gone through that very in-depth planning process, we move into project delivery, and we have funding. We are able to provide the resourcing to complete the plans through our team, through the partner funding I've already mentioned. And then there is also seed funding to get into the projects on the ground, where we certainly look to find other partners and funders as well. But that seed funding is really key because it enables us to move ahead efficiently and get to work on projects. So as I mentioned, the first phase of our work is planning focused. And when we're doing these regional adaptation plans, as I've mentioned already, we're really aiming to bring a broad range of stakeholders together, certainly producers and producer groups, and the whole range of government agencies and local governments are really key to this work. So that's one of our objectives with the regional planning. And then we're also really aiming to define those problems, as I mentioned, in a shared and collaborative way, and to build understanding of how climate change is impacting or will impact agriculture in that region. And then finally, to develop the kinds of solutions and strategies and actions that make sense in that regional context. So that's what we're up to when we're doing the planning process. And this slide just gives again, a slightly complicated visual, but the visual of all of the stages of our planning process. We do form committees, regional committees at the start of our planning process that stay with us. We're very fortunate, sometimes for many years. These committees stay with us and give us guidance and input in the regional context. And so they include the agricultural organizations, the government agencies. And then once we formed those committees up front, we get to work on, better understanding the regional context and the background in the region. And then we move into really gathering the input of producers predominantly and other local experts through a series of workshops. We bring the scaled down climate projections for that region into workshops. We talk about how that's going to impact agriculture in the region. And then we get into the strategies and actions that will make the most sense. And then finally, we move into thinking about where do we need to go first? What are our implementation priorities for the near term? And all of that is folded up into the plans that we then write up and share back and get final feedback. And that is the process. It takes about a year in total to build one of these plans. And there's certainly lots of engagement and input along the way. The content of the plans, and I'm hoping that some of you on the line have seen our plans, but I did just want to highlight that, all of that information I've just talked about is contained in those plans. The regional climate projections, the information about agriculture in that area of the province is kind of summarized, and there's quite a detailed table in each plan about the types of impacts for agriculture in the region. And then, of course, quite a bit of information about which impacts have been prioritized. So each plan is built around the types of climate impacts that are of greatest concern in the region. Those might be things like, you know, hotter and drier summers, you know, wetter winters or springs and falls, increasing extreme events like wildfire and flood. So those types of impacts form the base of each plan, have been prioritized, and then the strategies and actions are kind of built out from. And then there's an staging plan, as I've mentioned, that's into the priorities. And I'm just highlighting that content to sort of flag for anybody that's interested in thinking about adaptation in your region, for your sector in your region, or has a particular, you know, subject matter area that they're interested in, like pests or extreme heat. You know, each of these plans has a good amount of information. They're good sort of baseline reference documents that that can help people as a starting point. And then we get into our project delivery, which is where things get really fun, and Harmony will be able to talk more about the work we've been doing over the last several years in the Okanagan. And when we move into the planning, into the projects, our objectives start to shift a little bit. We're really aiming to deepen our knowledge of particular risks in that region. Again, as I mentioned up front, that's where we get into starting to build, you know, tools and resources and suitable kind of supports for the industry. We might be doing things like knowledge transfer, decision support tools, all of those things. And then at base, we continue to really try and strengthen collaboration and collaborative relationships, because we recognize that our work is part of a much bigger picture where we need to be supporting the industry with adapting, and the more we can build collaborations and put supports in place that can last with other partners, that's certainly an objective, underlying objective. And then people might be curious about how, with all of the things that are in these plans, there's a lot of content in them, how we establish the priorities for where to work, which projects to implement. And that really begins, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, with that implementation process that's part of the plan. So we've already been through this fairly in-depth process of thinking about, and I've highlighted on this slide a few of the things that we suggest that kind of guide those implementation priorities, things like the importance of the issue, really, frankly, the ease of implementation. So do we have the ability to do something to make a difference? Can we build capacity through these projects? And we work with our local committees a lot to try and continue to guide where we prioritize and what we should implement. And the final one is a little bit of the opportunistic side of project development and delivery. We have to be aware of, you know, where do we have the possibility for partnerships, where might we find funding opportunities, and certainly as well, where can we build on work that we might have started that we can take further. So those are all the kinds of things that get considered in developing the project priorities. So I think that's about where I'm going to hand it off to Harmony, and she can dig in a little bit more into the work in the Okanagan, but I can pause here and ask if there's any questions, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, let's take a minute. If people do have questions for Emily on some of the program mechanics and some of the background information, please, you could type them into the Q&A box and we can ask them. There is a mix of people. Some people are joining us from regions where there are regional plans in place, and others are from regions where there aren't plans, or even from other countries. I see there is a question here from Blair, if it's possible to access the regional action plans for the areas that we live in. Yes, all the plans are available on the website. So the map that Emily showed, that showed all the regions where adaptation plans exist, you can find those all at bcagclimateaction.ca.
And as a bit of a spoiler for what I was going to mention at the end of our presentation, we are going through a major redesign of our website, which will, I think, provide a much more user-friendly, I hope. These things are always evolving, but a more user-friendly interface for people. It will have really good organization by region and by climate impact. So you'll be able to see not only the regional plan, but all of the work that we've done kind of bundled together in a pretty accessible way, I think. And that we're hoping to have live by sometime in December. So just to kind of flag that, yes, all of that is online and it will be improving soon.
Yeah, we almost had this lined up to coincide with the launch of the new website, but for anyone who's been involved in a website project, it always takes longer.
I love that you think that's a Christmas present, Blair. That's certainly is for those of us that have been working on the site. It's very exciting.
Just before we move on to Harmony, there's a quick question here from Jessie, and she's wondering if there will be additional regions, especially the Thompson region. Definitely a question that's come up before, so Emily, I will let you answer that one.
Yes, at this point, we do not have funding within the current funding envelope for any more regional plans. What I will say is I think a lot of the work that we've done in the surrounding regions is really applicable to that part of the province as well. And I do welcome anybody who wants to chat about what materials we have that could be transferable, and certainly we would also be open to trying to do more to get those materials into the hands of folks in that region. We are aware that we have not covered all of the agricultural areas, but yeah, with where we are right now, we won't be doing any more during this funding period. So it's really about trying to make sure that what we have that's useful for producers in that region gets transferred out.
Great. Well, let's hand things over to Harmony. She's going to give us some examples from the Okanagan. And I think it'll be a good illustration of how this program works on the ground. So welcome, Harmony, and feel free to share your screen.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm just going to get set up. And here we go. All right. So yeah, I'm going to take over and do a bit of a deep dive into how we develop and implement agricultural adaptation projects in a specific region. As Emily mentioned, we do have about 65 adaptation projects either completed or underway across the province. But we thought it would be helpful to walk you through the process and the rationale for projects using examples from one region. So we're going to focus on the Okanagan Valley. Just a few quick stats about the Okanagan plans themselves. There is the original Okanagan Adaptation Strategies Plan and the Plan Update, and these two documents provide the direction for all of the projects in the region. So these documents were developed with input from 125 unique workshop participants, and that took place over 6 workshops. There were 2 different sets of workshops, one for the adaptation, the original plan, and the second for the adaptation update. And then our local working group, which Emily mentioned, now there's 8 members on that working group, and they provide direction for all of the projects and project spending. And to date, this group's participated in 15 working group meetings, which is the equivalent of about 200 hours of meeting time. And on top of that, all of our projects, which there are 10 in the Okanagan, or have been 10, some of them are finished. We do have subcommittees as well, one for each project. And these project oversight committees provide strategic guidance on projects and technical expertise. And these individuals have dedicated about 500 hours of time to this work. So really all to say that a lot of people have put a lot of volunteer time into developing the strategies and actions in the plans and then the projects themselves. So it really is a collaborative effort to get these projects developed and up and running. So producers in the Okanagan have a lot to prepare for with climate change. During the workshops, they prioritize 4 areas of focus for the Okanagan plan. Warmer and drier summers, not surprisingly, so increasing temperatures, decreasing late spring and summer precipitation, and this will impact water availability throughout the Okanagan. And we'll see an increase in water demand, so for crop irrigation, livestock watering, at a time when water supply is at its lowest, and there are many competing uses for this water. So that was by far the #1 impact that producers were concerned about in the Okanagan, followed closely by also somewhat related to warmer and drier summers, increasing wildfire risks. So we are expecting more intense and more frequent wildfires in the region, and that was also very top of mind for producers. So not enough water in the summer, but too much water in the spring and sometimes fall, as we've experienced in the Okanagan over the last few years. So earlier freshet, warmer spring temperatures causing rapid snowmelt, increasing spring precipitation, so having more rain on snow events, which was the cause of the significant flooding in the Okanagan a couple years back, all heighten the risk for floods and mudslides and landslides and all of that fun stuff. And then warming temperatures can also really wreak havoc on production schedules, so the timing of harvest, pest treatments, and that variability in conditions and those changing conditions are shifting the prevalence and distribution of pests and diseases and invasive species. So those were the top 4 impacts that were prioritized for the Okanagan. So when you look at the plans, all of the strategies and actions are developed around these 4 themes. So what does that look like from a project perspective? Well, you may remember that our local working group does provide strategic direction on the projects we undertake. And as Emily mentioned, in choosing those projects, they consider what was prioritized in the implementation section of the plan. So looking at things like, what's the most important? Are there existing resources and initiatives that we can build off of? Is this a first step in a multi-step process? Perhaps it's just really time sensitive. So all of those criteria. And we also look at obviously who our local collaborators are and what they want to move forward with. And we also try and strike a balance between projects across the province. So if one region's doing work that's transferable that we can build off of in another region, we may delay working on a topic if it's being covered somewhere else in the hopes that we can adapt those resources for local conditions at a later date. So you'll notice when you look at the project list, that the Okanagan projects are heavily prioritized for warmer and drier summers and increasing wildfire risk. Not surprising, those were as I said, the really top impacts and what people wanted to talk about at the adaptation workshops across all production systems as well, not just kind of 1 or 2. So we also did have a few projects addressing changes in pest populations. And as you'll notice, there actually aren't any to address increase in extreme precipitation events. This is really for a multitude of reasons, from funding to possible partners and so on. And it's also the case that we have a few projects that are moving forward in other regions. The actions in the plan relating to increasing extreme precipitation really focused on riparian enhancements and that type of thing. And there are some projects moving forward, specifically in the Kootenays, that should have some transferable materials. So in most cases with plans, we do end up doing projects that address all of the impacts, but in the Okanagan, for a variety of reasons, we've ended up with this mix that you see in front of you. So we have had 10 projects that are either, some of them are finished, some of them are still going on. And I won't have time to talk about all of them, but I will give you a snapshot of 3 that help to illustrate the breadth of need for agricultural adaptation projects, and that also really show how some projects are really specific to local conditions, and others have really significant broad applicability across the province. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a few. Before we get into that, though, I just want to share some things I've learned over the years of doing this about developing and delivering adaptation projects that are most likely to succeed. So the first being to keep it simple. Many complex climate change problems need simple stepwise solutions. The climate change projections are a bit scary, especially when we start to look to the 2050s and 2080s. And when you pair that up with having so many existing challenges, communication challenges, regulatory challenges, lack of resources, it can be quite overwhelming to look at these problems and try and come up with solutions. But even with this complexity, the solutions, when you break them down into steps, really can be quite simple. And I've got a few examples of those in the projects I'll tell you about today. Secondly, that forward planning is key. So you can't build resilience effectively in a crisis situation. A lot of our planning work focuses on emergency management or trying to reduce and minimize damages, whether it's drought, wildfires, floods, pest outbreaks. And we know that we have to build capacity and we have to drop the plans before the emergency, before the crisis. So some of the projects we're talking about today also focus on that. And finally, grounding solutions in agricultural knowledge and recognizing that producers will have the best solutions for resilience in their region. And this is really, in my opinion, one of the founding kind of principles of Climate Action Initiative. We're constantly engaging and re-engaging with producers and grounding our projects in the needs of the sector, to really make sure that the sector is front and center in identifying solutions that work for them. So, you know, a ground up approach versus a top down approach. So with that, I'll move into the first project that I'll tell you about. So one of three. So this is the Agricultural Water Supply Communications Project. And this is really a great example of how complex problems can have simple solutions. So drought was a hot topic at the adaptation workshop. Warming temperatures, reduced summer precipitation, and increasing water demand at a time when water supplies are really reduced and vulnerable. So to really understand this project, I've got to tell you that water supply management in the Okanagan is very complex and quite different than a lot of other parts of the province. So there are over 50 water purveyors. So these are entities that manage water and provide water to other users, whether it's domestic or agricultural or commercial. And these water purveyors are all of different sizes or scales. They get their water from different water supply sources, and all of those sources have their own vulnerabilities. So whether they're a reservoir or a surface water stream. On top of that, each purveyor has different levels of human resourcing, so a different capacity to communicate with their water users. And then on top of that, there's also surface water license holders. So those would be individuals who have a water license with the province. So versus those who get their water from a water purveyor. So it's a very complex water management system in the Okanagan to start with. So often what you have is neighboring farms who receive water from different suppliers or sources. So whether it be two different water purveyors or a water purveyor in the province. And really the main thing to remember is that each of these water sources is very different. So one of them might be vulnerable to drought under certain conditions, while the other one is not. So it's hard to look at, you know, what your neighbor is doing to figure out what you should be doing. The next complication comes from how drought levels are communicated. So by the province, by the media, and by local purveyors. So what we hear about when media covers drought is what the province has declared for a region. So drought levels at a provincial scale, even if they're for a region. But when a province declares a drought, the water purveyor may look at their own water supply and determine that the supply is stable. So maybe it's a reservoir and the levels are good. And they might decide not to enact any water restrictions, or in some cases, may not communicate with their water users at all to let them know what's going on. So what this leads to is really conflicting messages. You look at the news and you hear that we're in a drought and you don't know what you should be doing on your farm, if you should be trying to, you know, reduce your water use and so on and so forth. And it creates not a confusion over actions that should be taken, and also quite a bit of mistrust over whether these purveyors are properly managing their water supply. So we brainstormed how to fix this at the adaptation workshops, and the solution itself, even though the problem was very complex, the solution was relatively simple. So after conducting some research and hosting some focus groups with producers, we determined that the best option would be to provide real-time information. So kind of, I wouldn't say on demand, but real-time in the sense that the information is coming to you immediately when you need it, on the status of water supply. So that would be the fullness of the reservoir, snowpack levels, that type of thing. So producers then have firsthand information from their water supplier so they can make management decisions on their farm. So this was done through an electronic alert system, so similar to what you might receive from your regional district or city if you receive emergency management messages. So real-time water supply specific information right to the producer's inbox. To register for this, you log on to a website, you select your water supplier, and then select how you want to receive your messages, and you get something like this one here that's on the screen. And this is just an example of a message from Greater Vernon Water, which is one of the big water suppliers in the area. And this is starting to, again, reduce that confusion around when the province declares a drought. But it doesn't have an impact on the local water supplier. So in this case, the province declared a level 3 drought for the Okanagan. Greater Vernon Water's water supplies were slightly below normal. It was near the end of the growing season. So there were no additional restrictions required. And this message is just to let producers know that they need to, continue to conserve water as best they can, but really there's nothing at this point to worry about. So they don't need to be alarmed by the media or by what they're hearing in the news about the drought. So, a really simple solution to what was initially quite a complex communication challenge. So this project, though, a few takeaways, it really only succeeded because of strong partnerships. The first being the partnership with the Okanagan Basin Water Board. They could host and manage the software, so the software that sends out the electronic alert messages, and covered the subscription fee. And we could then offer that free of charge to all of the participating purveyors. Which currently stands at 10. There's a handful of others that we're hoping to get on board for this next year, and that will really cover off the main agricultural water suppliers in the region. And the project really wouldn't work if each purveyor had to acquire the software on their own and send those messages out. It would just be too expensive. So it worked because we had that, that regional body that could host that and deliver that. So we do work with each purveyor to customize a set of communication messages and create basically a cut and paste template, so it makes it really easy for them to send those messages out. And I did want to mention that the project was also successful because we could build up lessons that were learned through a similar project on Vancouver Island, where they were testing some different drought alert systems. And what really the main takeaway from that project is that we needed a system that was really nimble and that could deliver in real time. So, something that didn't require going out and changing highway signage or sending mail or that type of thing. So that's how we ended up in the electronic alert world. Sorry, hang on, there we go, pushing too many buttons. The project also filled a really important data gap, which interestingly, we didn't really know existed at the outset of the project. And that was that we didn't really know what the total number of water purveyors was in the region and the number of agricultural water connections each one had. So we knew the system was complex, but we didn't really know, how many purveyors we had to be working with to make this a success. So the project did create a baseline assessment and identify where all those water connections were, which is really helpful in allocating resources. And finally, while we haven't been able to serve surface water license holders, so those would be individuals who have a surface water license with the province, the system itself is very scalable. So if there was any interest in providing real-time messaging from the province to their surface water license holders, this program would certainly be able to, the Civic Ready program and the messaging would certainly be able to deliver that. So I think from a scalability perspective, there's a lot of potential for this one. So I will talk about one more project addressing warmer and drier summer conditions. This one is tailored to the wine grape sector. Vineyard water use efficiency and knowledge and technology transfer. I tell you, these titles, they're long. So with increasing pressure on water supply, the intention of this project was to highlight vineyard water use efficiency opportunities, given that grapes are one of the largest agricultural commodities in the region. So even though grapes rank quite low on irrigation water demand compared to other crops grown in the region, there are opportunities to increase vineyard irrigation efficiency, and this project develops some resources to do just that. One thing we also always hear is that grape growers use less water, that they can use less water, and that grape quality does benefit from deficit irrigation past a certain production point, but nobody really knew how most grape growers were watering their crops and whether they were doing it as efficiently as possible. So this project set out to answer exactly that, really to find out how grape growers were deciding when and how much to water, and to find out what tools and resources they were using to make those decisions. So getting a bit of a lay of the land, so to say. So through a series of interviews with growers and experts and tours of vineyards across the valley, we found out a few things. So one was that information tended to flow in one direction. So there was resources available for grape growers to access to improve their irrigation efficiency, but it tended to only flow in that direction. And there weren't a lot of opportunities for growers, especially growers who'd been doing grape growing for many years, who had a lot of knowledge, to share that information back with other growers. So there was a real gap in producer to producer knowledge transfer. Secondly, given the relatively low cost of water in the Okanagan, grape growers and really most producers don't really have an economic incentive to track water use and invest time and money in increasing the irrigation efficiency. Many growers don't have water meters, and they don't have any real feedback on how much water they're using, on how efficient their system is. And as the saying goes, you know, it's hard to improve what you don't measure. So there was also a real gap in just knowing and understanding how much water was being applied at what times. So to motivate producers to improve irrigation efficiency, since the cost of water is so low, we needed to focus on communicating the full economic cost of water, or the cost of excessive irrigation. So, you know, system maintenance, canopy maintenance for canopy management for excessive vigor or growth, equipment costs, and also the cost of, there are some diseases that are associated with overwatering, so the costs of managing and treating those. And grape growers really confirmed that if water was perceived to have a higher cost, so not just the cost of the water itself, but all of these associated costs, then producers would be willing to pay greater attention to their water use and improve their irrigation efficiency, and also to invest, you know, time and money into tools and technology to improve water use. So based on these takeaways, the project did develop 3 fact sheets to share knowledge about how technology can complement you know, knowledge or boots on the ground, so to say. So this focused on things like soil moisture sensors, pressure bombs, thermal imaging, which is done by drones. The other fact sheets provided information on the economic costs of overwatering, so getting growers to think about how overwatering might be affecting their pocketbooks, and then also on understanding their soil moisture holding capacity. So the project also produced a state of this is all summarized in a state of knowledge and technology report that also included some recommendations on next steps that could be taken to further support the sector in improving the irrigation efficiency. Excuse me. And we hosted a series of field days to share those resources with producers. Oh, sorry, there we go. I took out the other slide. The last thing I'll mention with this one is we did create a water tracking tool. So this is an Excel tool that does start to capture or start to look at the full cost of water. So looking at things like, you know, irrigation equipment, you'd enter some input. So irrigation equipment, your irrigation sets, how much labor it would take to run that irrigation equipment, maintenance, and so on. And it does produce an output that is a little, provides some insights into what those additional costs are when it comes to overwatering, to start to get people thinking about, you know, what money they might be able to invest in improving those systems. So I will move on to the final project that I'll talk about right now, and this is moving over into the wildfire realm, so strengthening wildfire preparedness and communications. So this is, again, is a bit of a complex project, so it does have some relatively simple solutions, and is a really good example of the need to forward plan. So, you know, taking steps to prepare for an emergency before the crisis comes, and also really highlights the importance of grounding those solutions in agricultural knowledge. So this project has been going on for many years. I think we started back in about 2016. So when I talk about this project, I'm going to talk about the really collection of projects that got us here. So agriculture producers really face unique challenges during wildfire events. So both faced with evacuation orders and alerts, and also when wildfires are in the area, but there's no immediate threat. So producers may have livestock to relocate. They may be required to make preparations to shelter livestock in place. Maybe they have to move harvest dates forward if that's a possibility, or move fresh stored or freshly picked crops to safety. And some operations have very large numbers of staff or visitors to consider if there's a wildfire in the vicinity. So really what they need, what producers need, is clear, concise information about wildfire status. So not only to ease stress, but to really help support appropriate response. On top of that, producers also need to have really pre-thought about their wildfire safety and response plans. So, pre-identifying where they're going to go if there's a fire in the vicinity, what they're going to do if there's a fire in the vicinity, whether they need to deploy sprinklers, move livestock, and what the trigger points are for all of these actions. So this project addresses both farm level preparedness and emergency response. So I put this slide up. There's a lot on here. I don't need to read it all to you, but really the point of it is to show the amount of complexity that is involved in wildfire response because of the sheer number of organizations that are involved. And this matrix is by no means exhaustive, but the key takeaway is that there are a lot of individuals involved. And each kind of player is responsible for a certain or can really only execute a certain amount of actions to minimize risk and reduce damages. So in the case of producers, there's really only a few things producers can do on their own to prepare for a wildfire. Reduce the risk of damage and loss, so fire smarting properties, prepare for a wildfire event to protect agricultural assets and essential operations. So that would be thinking about sprinkler deployment, livestock relocation planning, contingency planning, and arranging for appropriate insurance. So to support producers in making these preparations, this project created a guide or a plan to create a farm ranch wildfire plan. So this is a template and a guide, and they're designed to be used together to essentially develop your farm or ranch wildfire plan. There's a series of modules on all types of things you need to think about, from fire spreading your properties through to relocating livestock, thinking about water sources and all of that kind of stuff. These resources are available on our website, and they were shared provincially through a series of workshops organized by both Climate Action Initiative and the BC Cattlemen over the past few years. And Climate Action Initiative has since gone on to develop some videos as well, some supporting videos. These plans are a bit cumbersome to work through, so on your own. So there are 3 videos, one that provides an overview and one on fire smarting agricultural operations, and then the third on developing a map of your property. So kind of we're continually looking at these resources and trying to enhance them and provide additional supports wherever possible. So moving away from the farm level and into emergency response, there is a lot that producers can't control. So everything in that red box there really is getting at information that producers need to support their own response, but really is beyond the realm of their control. So this project, the second project, is developed to enhance communication and build relationships between response agencies and agricultural producers. So the work involves BC Wildfire Services, the Ministry of Agriculture, Regional District Emergency Operations Management staff, and then other individuals as well. And the project really recognizes this final project, the complexities of wildfire response and the need to move from reactionary to proactive communication. So really starting to plan and improve relationships outside of an emergency situation. So the project itself is focused on delivering, so we've been piloting this with the Regional District Okanagan for the past few years. And what we're piloting is really a series of relatively simple communication activities. So things like having a pre-season information exchange meeting with agricultural producers and emergency management staff to kind of a getting to know you event, providing information on who does what during an emergency, and providing the seasonal outlook for the wildfire outlook for the season, and so on. We have also introduced some more complex communication solutions, such as incorporating an agricultural liaison officer assistant into the emergency operations center. So this would be an individual who would work closely with the Ministry of Agriculture staff member to liaise with the agriculture sector in their area or their commodity specific and provide support in response and really help to integrate that agricultural knowledge into the Emergency Operations Center response activities. There's also a post-wildfire season debrief that takes place with producers, and a whole bunch of just kind of simple individual mechanisms that help to build relationships and help to streamline the flow of information from response agencies to producers. So as I said, we work closely with the regional districts on this, as well as other response agencies. There is a document that was created that informed this process, so the discussion document, planning and information exchange for wildfire impact reduction, and this is based on consultation with many producers across the province, looking at where communication tends to break down during a wildfire emergency. So that document is really the foundation of the project that I just mentioned now. I did say we had those wildfire preparedness workshops and video resources to support producers in doing their farm level plans. And finally, I'll just mention that this pilot project we've been doing with the regional district, Okanagan Valley, we are now expanding that into the Kootenays and Boundary area. So we'll be working with a total of 4 regional districts over the next 2 years to deliver enhanced communications for the agriculture sector. And all of those eventually will be available, all those resources will be available as provincial templates. So, so hopefully we'll be able to benefit a broader portion of BC in the future. And that is that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Harmony. You did a great job in explaining how these projects roll out on the ground. And I know each project was quite different, and the Okanagan is unique to other regions of the province. But I would be interested to hear from people how this work could relate to what's happening in their own regions or in the areas that they work. So we do have time for questions. So please, take a moment for some reflection on how this work could apply to what you're doing, questions you have about how these projects could be built on, what's in the regional plans. And we do have a couple of questions here. So I'll start off, Harmony, with just a question back on the water supply project. Mm-hmm. And there was a question on how granular the information is. And maybe you could just explain how the water suppliers, the area that they cover, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely granular. So the information is provided by the water supplier. So based on the exact conditions of their water supply. So when you register for the electronic alerts, you select your water purveyor, and you are getting kind of a real-time update from the water supplier on the exact status of their supply. So what that area looks like is dependent on the water supplier itself. Some of these suppliers are very small, and some of them are quite a bit larger, and they may actually have multiple water sources and so on. So it would be as granular as as kind of the situation on the ground as it relates to the water purveyor themselves.
Great, thank you for that answer. Thinking about how the work in the regions can apply provincially or to other regions, could you just talk for a minute, Harmony, about for wildfire, for example, because wildfire is an impact that's impacting so many regions of the province. Could you just speak to how the work that was piloted in the Okanagan is now being rolled out at the provincial level or in other regions?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the wildfire project from a kind of provincial application is a good one. So I mentioned the discussion document that was developed that informed the project, so the communication side of the project, and that was looking at how communication flows during an emergency and where there are opportunities for improvement. And that work actually consulted with producers in the Okanagan and also up in the Caribou, because it was on the heels of the Caribou wildfire that summer where the whole Caribou was on fire. And there were some real kind of successes and lessons from the Caribou that could then be integrated into, that are applicable to response across the province. So I think from an informing perspective, there was kind of bit of a provincial scale for that. And then the resources themselves, so the farm and ranch preparedness, the guide and the template, those are, they were developed through the Okanagan, as an Okanagan project, but have since been rolled out across the province. As I said, you know, we've done provincial workshops. The BC Cattlemen use that as their go-to guide when they put on emergency preparedness workshops. And we've since been able to really recognize that that is a resource that's going to be, you know, valuable to pretty much every producer in British Columbia, and are trying to drive that out now at the provincial level. And then the communications project.
Sorry, can I just step in? Harmony,
Yeah.
can I just step in for half
Please.
a sec?
Yeah.
So we did do 18 workshops over a 2-year span in different communities all across British Columbia to share out that guide and that workbook. And those were very in-depth sort of planning sessions where there was a lot of technical expertise, and the different fire agencies were brought into the room along with producers. So as I mentioned, you know, really that covered pretty much every region of the province that has fire risk, those workshops. And we are now working to transfer that guide and that workbook more over to agencies that do some direct or have potential to do some direct work with producers in their regions on fire preparedness and planning. So we have a series of small workshops coming up in the spring. They'll probably be online, that will engage with agency staff across the province to kind of share out those resources more and try to boost their use at the community level between the agencies that deal with fire and producers. So sorry, I just wanted to weigh in on that because
Yeah, no,
I'm
that's
the one
great.
managing that work. So
Yeah.
Well, Emily, while you have the mic anyways, do you want to just speak to for a minute on the opportunities for building from these projects and where to find all these documents?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last slide here was just to try and highlight that we do have, you know, a lot of material. As Harmony mentioned, many of these projects were really deeply grounded in doing consultation with the key agencies, with the producers. So we don't, you know, yes, we have the product that comes out at the end, or the tool or the resource or the work that's happening on the ground, but very often there are baseline materials. And we really do encourage, you know, researchers and those with government that have an interest in kind of understanding more deeply these issues, or thinking about starting a project that would be related in your area, or you know, digging into research on any of these topics, to access those materials. So there are things like reports and executive summaries. There are actual individual research summaries on many of the applied research projects. And you know, you can look to those resources to kind of build your baseline or figure out your starting point. And often many of those documents as well, you know, Harmony mentioned the wine grape project, and there are many others where there are recommendations for further research. So you know, we certainly can't, we're covering some of these issues. There are many more that need more work, that need more research or effort, and many of our materials can provide some of that guidance about kind of where to look for further research. So I do strongly recommend that folks take a look around at those materials in whatever area you might be thinking of focusing on. And I will mention one more time that we will have a new website that will have a much more sophisticated library for searching and that kind of thing by topic. So that will help people to find the resources that you might be looking for. And as I say, hopefully mid-December, that will be up and running.
Great. Well, we're at the hour now, so I just would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be sharing the recording of the session, and we can also share the presentations. A couple of people asked for that. And before we end, I just want to give a quick promo. We do have the full ACORN workshop taking place December 7th to 9th. So that's just about 10 days away. And over those 3 days, we will have 12 sessions. Some of them are applied research sessions focusing on adaptation research for berry and vegetable and soil issues. As well, we'll have about 5 interactive workshops where there will be breakout discussion talking through some of these topics, everything from climate and weather data to Indigenous worldview and how that applies to agriculture adaptation, as well as a session on participatory planning for ag adaptation. So I would encourage you to go to bcacorn.com and check out what's there, and hopefully you can join us. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. And thank you to our presenters, Emily and Harmony, for sharing all the work that you've been doing.